Hi, and welcome to episode 3 of Full Moon Film Buff. This time, we're going to be talking about the 1935 film Werewolves of London. I rented this from Amazon Prime. Now, I hadn't seen the whole movie all the way through before, but I do remember watching clips for this from my days back in film school. That's how important it is to cinema and to some specific industries like the makeup industry. Now let's talk about the crew and cast. This film was directed by Stuart Walker and written by John Colton. The effects were designed by Jack Pierce. Maybe. He wasn't credited, and there is some dispute. As far as the cast goes, Henry Hull played Dr. Wilfred Glendon. Warner Oland played Dr. Yogami of the University of Carpathia. Valerie Hobson played Lisa Glendon, Wilfred's wife. And Lester Matthews played Paul Ames, Lisa's childhood boyfriend. Lawrence Grant played Colonel Sir Thomas Forsyth, Paul's uncle and Lady Forsyth's son, who is the Chief of Scotland Yard. Spring Byington played Miss Eddie Coombs. Originally, the studio planned to cast Boris Karloff as Dr. Glendon and Bela Lugosi as Dr. Yogami, but it was filmed simultaneously with Bride of Frankenstein in 1935, in which Karloff reprised his star-making role of Frankenstein's monster, so Universal had to recast. Somehow, however, Valerie Hobson did go on to play Elizabeth Frankenstein in Bride of Frankenstein. Lugosi would eventually portray the gypsy werewolf who bites Lon Chaney Jr.'s titular character in The Wolfman from 1941. Jack Pierce had already made a name for himself with Frankenstein and would go on to design Lon Chaney Jr.'s iconic look in The Wolfman. Warner Oland, an American actor born in Sweden, is perhaps most infamously known for playing Charlie Chan and Fu Manchu, something we'll talk about later. I absolutely and wholeheartedly recommend this movie. It was made in 1935, and by modern standards, it's certainly tame. It predates the great Lon Chaney Jr.'s The Wolfman by 6 years, but it is in many ways the prototypical, foundational werewolf movie that all others really come from. This is the start of werewolf cinema, and if you want to consider yourself at all an expert, you've got to have seen this one. Now for a synopsis. Wilfred Glendon, a wealthy English botanist, journeys to Tibet in search of the extremely rare plant Mariphasa lupina lumina, which is rumored to be nourished by the light of the moon. While there, he is attacked and bitten by a strange creature, but succeeds in acquiring a sample of the plant. Back in London, he constructs a lamp simulating moonlight in his laboratory and waits for the plant to bloom. At a party, Wilfred is approached by a fellow botanist, Dr. Yogami, who claims they met briefly in Tibet, where he unsuccessfully also sought the Mariphasa. Yogami tells Glendon the plant is a temporary antidote for werewolfery or lycanthrophobia, both words they actually use in the movie. Wilfred is skeptical. Yogami claims he knows 2 men in London who are werewolves. Wilfred's wife Lisa also reconnects with her childhood sweetheart, Paul Ames, who is back from America. Eventually, one Mariphasa blossom opens under Wilfred's moon lamp. When his hand grows fur in the artificial moonlight, he cuts the blossom and dabs its sap against the fur, and is amazed to see the transformation reverse. Yogami visits, asking for 2 blossoms, but Wilfred refuses. Before he leaves, Yogami cautions that werewolves try to kill whatever they love most. Wilfred researches werewolves, learning they must kill someone every night they transform or they will not turn back. Yogami steals both newly opened Mariphasa flowers. Wilfred chooses not to accompany Lisa for a visit to her Aunt Eddie's party. Soon after Lisa and Paul leave, Wilfred transforms into a werewolf. With no blossom available to reverse the process, he goes after Lisa. Eddie's screams scare him away, so he settles for mauling a random working woman in the street. No one at the party, other than Eddie, saw the werewolf, so they think she just had a drunken dream. When Paul reads a newspaper story about the woman Wilfred killed the next morning, he reconsiders Eddie's story. Having heard a similar story while he was in the Yucatan, Paul tells his uncle, Colonel Forsyth, who is the chief of Scotland Yard. Forsyth does not take him seriously. Since the last Mariphasa blossom has still not opened yet, Wilfred rents a room for the night and locks himself inside, but he breaks out after transforming. He sneaks into the zoo where he sets a wolf free and then kills a woman who has come for a tryst with the night watchman. The next day, Yogami asks Forsyth to seize the plant from Wilfred, but Forsyth has fallen for Wilfred's red herring and is looking for the wolf, not a werewolf. Wilfred travels to Falden Abbey, his wife's family home in the country, and has the caretaker lock him in a room. However, Lisa and Paul have also come to look around the property before Paul returns to California. Wilfred, now a werewolf, sees them. He breaks free and attacks. Paul drives him off, recognizing him in the process. Paul tells Forsyth, who, though skeptical, agrees to investigate Wilfred. They are sidetracked when a dead chambermaid is found in Yogami's hotel room, which is too far from Fulton for the supposed werewolf to have traveled there in just one night. Paul discovers Yogami's used Mariphasa blossoms in the wastebasket, and Forsyth is convinced there are two werewolves on the loose. The police search all day for Wilfred, who is hiding in his lab, waiting for the only remaining Mariphasa flower to bloom. When it does, Yogami sneaks in and uses it. An enraged Wilfred attacks. He transforms during the struggle and kills Yogami, and then chases Lisa around the house, knocking Paul unconscious. As he slowly closes in on his wife, Forsyth arrives and shoots him. Wilfred thanks Forsyth for the bullet and apologizes to Lisa for not being able to make her happier, before dying and reverting to his human form. Forsyth tells Lisa that he will say he accidentally shot Wilfred while Wilfred was trying to protect her. The first thing we're going to talk about is the actual transformation into a werewolf, since we finally get one. The makeup was apparently originally designed by the great Jack Pierce, famous for Frankenstein, and eventually Lon Chaney Jr. as the Wolfman. He apparently designed a much more intense makeup transformation than the one that was actually used in the movie, which was apparently designed by the actor himself, Henry Hull, a fairly accomplished makeup artist himself, as was pretty common in the early days of cinema. The theory, or the reason I've read and seen bandied about, is that Henry Hull wanted to be able to emote more and felt that the heavy layers of makeup that Jack Pierce wanted to apply to him would get in the way of that. He wanted to be able to express the emotions that Wilfred was going through during his transformations. And I think to a degree, that's true, that succeeds. We're able to see the pain and the struggle on his face as he goes through the transformation in a way we really can't even see in the Wolfman. However, a consequence of that is that this particular werewolf doesn't look a whole lot like what we expect a werewolf to look like. In fact, he shares more cosmetic similarities with Jack the Ripper or Dr. Hyde than anything else. He's a man, a hairier man, with slightly longer teeth, walking around in a full suit. He doesn't tear off his clothes. He doesn't become animalistic and walk around on all fours. He just becomes animalistic internally and not as externally as we're used to. I don't know if that's to the detriment of the film. We certainly understand what's happening to him, but it is a limitation of the makeup at the time. How do you make that kind of extreme transformation and still let the actor be able to convey what the character is thinking and feeling? Now, the werewolves in this movie don't seem to have any supernatural weaknesses. They're weak to everything. Ultimately, a bullet is what brings him down, right? Not a silver bullet or something special. But they do seem to be a little stronger and a little tougher, a little more agile than a normal human. They're just driven by this lust to kill. One thing I did really enjoy is that this film uses a very neat split-screen composite in order to showcase a dynamic first transformation scene. I wish we saw this more. And we see it all the time now. So often, in fact, that you probably don't even notice most instances of it. I'm going to show it here so you can see how, as the camera pans, probably almost certainly on a dolly, the actor is able to retrace his steps in different layers of makeup, and they're able to cut from scene to scene on those hidden columns so that the transformation looks seamless and like it's happening in real time. A very neat special effects trick that they knew all the way back in 1935. So let's talk about the theme of this movie, which isn't the strongest part of the movie. I do feel like the theme is jealousy. Wilfred is already losing his wife even before his romantic rival shows up and even before he turns into a werewolf. And his transformation isn't motivated by his jealousy or by the loss of his wife, but it's clearly what's driving him as a character, and it's clearly what's going on. He's pulling himself away from her by his dedication to his work and his focus on his science. He's not taking care of her. He's not showing her the attention she needs, and that's leaving her in a position where when Paul shows up from her past, she's happy to have someone paying attention to her. And then Wilford lashes out violently. I think it is interesting that the only people killed by a werewolf in this movie are women. We have the poor working woman who's just walking home. We have the woman who is engaged in an illicit affair with the zookeeper, which was kind of an odd little insertion. We have an attack on Aunt Eddie, and we have the death of the chambermaid, which we don't see on screen, but we hear about, that Dr. Yogami killed. That's an interesting choice, and it's one that plays into the similarity that this particular werewolf visibly shares with Dr. Hyde and with Jack the Ripper, right? These are killers who are targeting weaker women. They don't go after men. In fact, it's notable that the only time a man is attacked in this movie, it's when he's with a woman. And I think that's an interesting choice to show that the animal in this case targets the weak. It targets those that it can more easily kill. It's not going after the big game. It's going after the weakest. Finally, we cannot talk about this movie without talking about Orientalism. Dr. Yogami is a character of unknown and unspecified ethnicity. He speaks with an accent. He's from the University of Carpathia. Yogami is a vaguely Japanese name, and certainly Aunt Eddie makes the mistake of calling Dr. Yogami by a host of other Japanese names that inclines us to believe that he's supposed to be Japanese. But he's played by the actor Werner Orland, who's Swedish. Doesn't even terribly look Japanese or Chinese. Werner Orland is most well known for playing the roles of Fu Manchu and Jackie Chan through years and years of Hollywood history. This was a common practice back then. Today we would refer to it as yellowface, a white actor using makeup and putting on an accent to pretend to be another nationality. And it's something in general we look down on for good reason. This goes back to the thing we talked about a couple films ago, the exotic other. Dr. Yogami is scary because he's not white. He's not part of our group. And this was a unfortunately common thing that happened quite a bit. People who weren't from the in-group were free to be monsters, free to be causing problems for our, good British upper-class scientists, right? Now, that's not to say that it's always horrible. I know that some people will tell you that, and I don't really want to go out on a limb and say, yeah, we should have more of this, because I don't think we should. I think if you want to cast an Asian person, let them have input. Asian people can be bad guys just like they can be good guys, right? That's not the problem. The problem is when we don't let Asian actors, or of any ethnicity. Obviously, in this case, we're talking about yellowface, but this is a problem that can exist on any number of spectrum, right? If we're telling stories about people and not telling stories with people, that can be a real problem. Additionally, there are examples of what has sometimes been referred to as Occidentalism, which is kind of a reverse thing. There are and have been huge movie industries in other parts of the world that have turned to the West and portrayed Western people as different and other and done almost the exact same thing. It's not great in that situation either. It's a product of its historical time. It's something we shouldn't do today, and it's just something we should be aware of. Finally, in conclusion, this movie's great. I heartily recommend that anyone watch it. You will have a fun time. It will be fairly entertaining. It's certainly not, this is a great movie to even show kids, because today's kids, obviously, because it is so tame compared to modern standards. Heartily recommended. Next week, my kids actually made a request, and so we're not following chronological order. Next episode, we're going to talk about an animated werewolf film called Wolf Children. I think you'll really enjoy it. I hope to see you then, so keep an eye on the moon and a silver bullet in the chamber, and we'll see you soon.